Hello everyone. Today I've got another deck for you, the Threbin deck. This deck is a resource destruction deck, and I'm just going to show you one video of it to kind of showcase how it can go. So the idea behind this deck is to use this card called Plague that destroys one of your resources and two of your opponent's resources. Now, it's usually not that great of a card most of the time. Because you spent 4 resources to do it, which is a lot of commitment. And so you normally don't see this card that much. But a couple of new cards have been released over the years that have made it a lot more viable. It's a really old card, but the new cards that have been introduced that help it out are cards like Ruby Embellished Dagger, a buff to Thoughtful Investment, and also there's a Devoted Knight. Actually, that one is kind of like an older card as well. But here, the idea is we use these resource ramp cards to gain resources. And by doing that, we can actually basically gain those resources and then be ahead of our opponent on resources. And when you're ahead of your opponent on resources, Plague suddenly becomes a pretty decent card, actually, because what ends up happening is you have enough resources to kind of not care about Plague as much, whereas your opponent can be on 2 resources or even 1 resource if you combo it correctly, and that can really, really hurt them, especially a slower deck like Xana. So you can see here I use Plague to knock Xana down from 4 resources to 2 resources. And what that does against the Xana matchup is it means that Xana can no longer easily bring out stuff like Tidal Wave or her fatties. That is normally how she would win the game. And so alongside with resource destruction strategies, you normally want to have a lot of low-cost allies. And so that's why I play stuff like Twilight Herald, Larian Knight, and Devoted Knight. It's because when you have these low-cost allies out, you can really deal a lot of damage and at the same time blow up your opponent's resources, so they can't do much in response to that. And so we're going to see here that even though my opponent, even though my allies are really wimpy, a 1 attack, 2 attack, and 1 attack ally, even though they're wimpy, my opponent can't do much about it because, again, Xana can't get to 5 resources to Tidal Wave this board. She can't really play any allies out other than cheap allies like Devoted Knight there. So that's part of the reason why this deck can really shine against these decks that require a slower game plan. So here we're going to go ahead and kill the Devoted Knight. It's really important to kind of deal with your opponent's board. Losing the board makes it really hard to play this deck because Plague and Cobra Skin Wraps, these are really bad tempo-wise. So you need to control the board when you're playing those resource destruction effects. So that's another reason why we play like Twilight Herald, which is a really weak card. It's because it's so important to have that early game board control. So here we do a combo, which is to play the Plague to knock our opponent down to 2 resources. Now, Plague cannot knock our opponent down to any less than 2 resources. That's part of the restrictions on the card. But Cobra Skin Wraps doesn't have that same restriction. So if you can get to 8 resources, what you can do is play Plague and then play Cobra Skin Wraps. And now I'm keeping my opponent on 1 resource, which basically means my opponent, who probably doesn't run any 2-cost allies, basically can't play anything. And there I can get rid of that bulk of curses, which is going to make my board extremely threatening for my opponent. And one interesting thing I do want to point out about this deck is that you do actually kind of burn through your deck really, really quickly. So you can see here, it's only turn 11, and we're already basically 3/4 of the way through our deck, and a little bit more than that actually. And that's because of how many draw cards we play to kind of fuel this really card advantage greedy deck. You play a lot of cards that give you resources and blow up resources, and neither of those really give you card advantage. And so your card advantage is going to come from stuff like Bad Santa, Loom of Fate, and you really burn through that really quickly. But yeah, anyway, this deck is really good against anything that's slow. So any control decks, anything that needs a ton of resources, and so you can see against some priests. This one was interesting. It was a priest, but it was an attachment priest, so it was actually kind of a faster deck. I actually don't remember this game, but yeah, you can see how you can win against some of those slower decks. Sometimes you can even win against maybe an aggro deck like Amber or Zaladar if you get off to a good start. And Serena's also really slow. Here I didn't draw into a way to deal with their Thought Last Cut Last in time, but if you really do draw into your resource destruction, you can shut down Serena before she can play any 5-cost card, which would be ideal. So yeah, that is the Threbin deck. And to go over the deck list really quickly. Okay, so we're still on Banebow, but this would be Threbin. All right. So yeah, this is the deck list. We run 43 cards, and I still feel like I often deck out. So I would say, you do want to have a consistent deck, but if you're always decking out, that's also not a good thing. So I like to run 43. I would even consider bumping it up a little bit, but not too much because you really need to draw into your Plagues and your Cobra Skin Wraps. So it's really important to draw into those 2 cards in every single game. And then we just max out on the resource generation, and I would say that's like the best thing to play on turn 3. You really want to build up those resources faster than your opponent can, because that's when you're going to see the best value out of something like Plague. If you're just playing it and you don't have any additional resources over your opponent, it's really more of just like stalling the inevitable. So you do want to have more resources so you can just out advantage your opponent by playing more stuff than they can. And then you do run some bilateral draw like Loom of Fate and Bad Santa, but I would say normally it's not that bad to give your opponent draw in this deck because you're going to knock down their resources anyway. So they'll have all these cards in their hand and they can't play all of them because they'll be on like 2 resources. So yeah, that's the deck. I would say it's kind of fun to pull off, and if you know that you're going to be running into a lot of control decks, this is a good option to kind of counter them. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. That was the Resource Destruction Plague Threbin, and thank you for watching.